Hello, my name is Christy Jett. I am a journalist working with Horror Hunt Magazine, Rue Morgue Magazine, and FearNet. And I am here today for Scream Factory to talk a bit about the female puberty experience in horror films. Obviously, we're here because of Ginger Snaps, but that's not the first film that started all of this. But first, let me introduce who we're here with today. To the right of me is filmmaker Axel Carolyn. Next, we have journalist Heidi Honeycutt. And on the end, from Fangoria Magazine, we have writer and filmmaker Rebecca McKendry. So as I said, Ginger Snaps was not the first film to really explore the topic of the female puberty experience, you know, period blood and all of that. Becca, would you like to sort of talk about one of the first films that you remember as exploring that theme?
Just throwing it right to me. One of my favorite ones that I'll talk about is a Czechoslovakian film. And it's an experimental film. It's very kind of surrealist. It's from 1970s and it's called Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. And it is literally about a girl who, when she first gets her period, things start changing and she starts seeing vampires around the town. And it's kind of as if her puberty brings out the monsters. And I didn't see this one till much later in my life, but it's one that I kind of wish I had seen when I was a teenager because I think I would have really connected with it, because it is very much kind of a changing from purity to seeing much more of the world around you.
Heidi, do you remember the first film that you saw that really explored this?
I do. The first film that I ever saw that explored the concept of female puberty and the horror film was Carrie, the original Carrie, not the remake. Even though I look young enough to, never mind. Yeah, the scene of Carrie in the shower, where everybody's, screaming at her and, she's, all that, like that was probably, I don't know, I was maybe 5 years old when I saw that the first time. And that was when I first kind of made the connection between, in movies, your period is really bad and horrible. And then it was in real life too, so.
And Axel, for you?
Same thing, it'd be Carrie. I think I actually read the book before I saw the film, and I felt like the book was, I wouldn't say going more into details, but it was more themed around being a teenager and hitting puberty and all. And so it's mostly the book for me that strikes me most.
And sort of a question to everybody, as females, we may have grown up watching a lot of, comedies, horror comedies, or things that sort of make light of puberty experience in general. But what horror, at least in my experience, horror really does make it more of a visceral experience. Becca, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
One of my favorite ones that really kind of turned puberty more visceral was Martin. And it's weird because it's not from a female perspective at all, it's from a male perspective. But he's kind of coming onto his own and discovering that he lusts after these bodily fluids. And that, for me, it was just, it spoke to me. I remember I watched that one when I was a teenager, and it was just watching him kind of come onto his own, even though that it was from a male perspective, was very effective on me.
The funny thing is, one of mine in that respect, obviously not toned towards the puberty experience, but May, because she started out very awkward with this lazy eye, and then we cut to her early 20s. But you have to sort of assume that time in between, she's just an awkward person in general, and a lot of the puberty experiences, these awkward fumblings of boys and girls, and something we can all, relate to. Heidi, you're a filmmaker, a writer. You've probably seen everything,
Oh no, I think Rebecca's seen everything.
No.
But I've seen a lot of things. Sorry, what was the main question?
There was no question.
Okay. One thing that I do think is interesting is, you mentioned Martin, but I can't honestly think of any other films where they depict the male puberty experience.
Teen Wolf.
In it.
Teen Wolf.
Well, Teen Wolf, you're right. Okay, but that's a comedy. See, I don't know I can't think of any other films where they depict it in a terrifying way. Usually when it's men, it's like funny, it's silly, and we can all relate to that.
They're all
And,
80s
you wanna have
comedies
sex,
about nerds and the
you see your girl's
cheerleaders.
boobs, and you get,
But when it's women, it's also interesting that it's usually, it's more threatening, it's scarier, it's not treated in a funny way, but it's not so much threatening to the woman as it is to the men. And especially in Ginger Snaps, they turn into werewolves, and then you see Teeth is not really puberty, it's a little bit later, but it's the same kind of idea that suddenly a woman's sexuality becomes threatening and becomes something that people need to be aware of and scared of.
That even goes all the way back to Repulsion in the late 60s, where the sexuality and virginity actually becomes a monster and changes you internally.
Mm-hmm. And Carrie, of course, is another one.
And we were talking about this earlier, where even in Carrie and in Ginger Snaps, you have these female characters going through puberty who are actually much older than most girls are when they go through puberty. Most girls are like 11, 12, maybe 13, but they have like 16-year-olds. Because when you have a 16-year-old, you can make her sexy and you can bring sex into it.
Yeah.
But they seem to link puberty and sexuality as if it was the same thing.
Yeah.
When frankly,
it isn't. I mean,
no, there's years in between. Usually.
Yeah, I got my period and I was playing with unicorns in my bedroom for like 4 years before like anything happened.
Yeah,
you know
I
what I
did
mean?
too.
Like, yeah.
So.
Now with Ginger Snaps, the interesting thing is because we have the Fitzgerald sisters who are kind of dark and morbid as it is, but then with Ginger, she just takes on this unadulterated, she just becomes terrifying, you know, and it's a very sensual kind of fear. And I always found that quite fascinating. For me, Ginger Snaps was the first film to really like make it sexy but also terrifying.
I think I see what you're getting at, and a lot of movies that did this before Ginger Snaps did it with vampirism. So like you have a lot of these old Hammer films and other movies from the 70s, 80s that really have portray lesbianism and female sexuality as this terrifying, monstrous thing. And you can't just have sex with a man, you have to have sex with him and then suck his blood and decapitate him. And somehow it's the violence that goes along with the sex act that is so satisfying, not just sex for some reason. So, and I kind of see that in Ginger Snaps as well, and in Teeth, and in these other movies where you can't, like, for some reason the women just can't enjoy sex. They can't just have sex. They have to also be murderers or monsters. And I find that very strange. I don't really understand that.
Yeah. There's also an element of men having to let their guard down. Because, I mean, sex in general, you kind of have to, let your guard down with the person for a bit. But it's always, the woman who could potentially be the monster. And then when she changes, it's like an aha moment. Oh, you should have known she was female. But I mean, that goes all the way back to even Greek mythology where, Pandora was a female and supposed to demonstrate that females had released all the evil onto the world. And
Adam
monsters,
and Eve.
Yeah. Lilith. Yeah. All the way back. They're always female monsters.
Another thing that I find interesting about Ginger Snaps is the relationship between Ginger and Bridget, which is something that I find pretty unique in that regard, in that you see that what's horrible is not just that puberty brings out different instincts and different needs and different changes in your body that you don't understand, but also separates you from people who are not. Bridget doesn't have the same changes at the same time, and so they used to be very close. Suddenly they don't understand each other. And Bridget is, I'm guessing, the character that most people can relate to, because she also, there's this thing that is, Ginger Snaps is very good with, is that showing that really awkward stage of being a teenager, just becoming a teenager and being very awkward and dressing in strange ways and wanting to be cool. And it's, I feel like that's one of the few films where I can find that very clearly. Like the other day I was driving past, I was driving on Ventura Boulevard and I saw this group of teenagers. They must have been like maybe 14 at most. And I was just looking at them. It brought back all those memories of being that age and feeling uncomfortable. And no matter what you do, your hair is never what you want it to be. And you're never dressed the way you should be. And you always have too much makeup or not enough. And the girl next to you is always cooler and she's always prettier and you always feel awkward. And it's the time where it's the most important to feel good and be pretty and project something, and your image is the most important thing in the world, and it just doesn't work. And I feel like that's one of the things that you find between Bridget and Ginger, where suddenly Ginger becomes this really sexy girl that everybody aspires to be, but everybody really feels like Bridget.
And the funny thing is, as we were talking about, there's the male puberty experience, and it's comical. It's American Pie. It's it's that sort of funny sex comedy. With girls, it's a bit more dire when it comes to horror movies. And in the same sense of with women, it's this seductive quality, or it's this the girl, she was the bad girl and it turns bad, but with the MPAA, the way that they rate films, and they say, if a woman's having an orgasm, like they can't handle a woman having an orgasm. But when it comes to horror movies, she can be as sort of sultry as she wants, and it's the blood aspect that makes it a little naughty.
I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe it's like a bodily fluids thing. And so it's like we're substituting blood essentially for semen, right? Like, they're like the character will have sex and then kill the guy, and instead of him coming, he just squirts blood everywhere. I don't know. I mean, maybe like it's the same kind of mental association, but one is obscene and one is okay for some reason. I don't know.
There's a book about that.
Oh, really?
It's called Recreational Terror. It's by Isabel Pinheiro. And it focuses on the active female bloodletting on screen instead of the female orgasm, because you can't show the female orgasm. They have to bleed.
Another film that deals with the whole idea of young girl and being involved in sort of the Company of Wolves is The Company of Wolves, the Neil Jordan film. I don't know, we've all seen this one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it because it's the Little Red Riding Hood fairy tale. In a sense, it plays a lot with fairy tale elements, but it really takes kind of the innocence that you see in fairy tales and exacerbates it out to what it actually is saying.
Yeah, I mean, like it's Little Red Riding Hood is essentially about this little girl being stalked in the woods by this evil wolf, and so using that as like a metaphor for men being scary wolves who just want to stalk you and rape you because they can smell the blood of your period and it excites them because they're all monsters. Like that's kind of one way to go with that fairy tale. I feel like it's kind of what we all secretly feel about the fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood, even if we don't consciously.
Yeah, that wolf's a little rapey. Whether or not it's written down, he's a little rapey.
Yeah.
It's the flip side of ginger snaps, isn't it?
Like, yeah.
When it comes to this whole idea of the female puberty experience in film, is there one film that really speaks to you and is more relatable? Something that you watch that and you just feel it yourself?
For me, it was always The Craft, which isn't quite puberty, because I assume there's a difference between Hollywood puberty and real puberty, because real puberty happens early and then you don't develop sexuality until much later. But so in The Craft, it's much more about just where they are. They're in high school, they're at that awkward phase, and all of the girls have something where they don't like about themselves or they feel awkward about it, and then they are able to make all that go away. And just seeing that when I was in high school, I mean, that was every girl's dream, to have the power to be able to do that, to become the popular girl, or to make your hair less greasy, or whatever your problem might be. But yeah, that one always stuck with me. I used to watch that over and over.
That's the entire empowerment thing, I mean, granted, it might not be about our periods, but taking power, especially away from men who we feel like have taken that away from us. Yeah. Is there one like that for you, Miss Heidi?
I mean, I feel like I can relate way more to something like The Craft than I can to like Carrie or even Ginger Snaps. I mean, as good of a film as Ginger Snaps is, I honestly cannot in any way relate to either Ginger or Bridget. It's, my experience with puberty was very, I think, typical of most women. And, I didn't start having really promiscuous sex with strange people and killing them. And, I was never terrified of my own period blood. Like, I knew what it was, and I was expecting it, and I understood the process. And so to me, like, the idea that it's somehow terrifying or weird is really foreign. Like, I don't really have that to relate to in my own life. I mean, I can see it and appreciate it in the films, but I can definitely relate to the friendships and the wish fulfillment aspect of The Craft way more.
I'm kind of the opposite. I would say Carrie.
Really?
Yeah, I think puberty and teenage years, and maybe I had really bad teenage years, but I mostly feel pain and awkwardness and, becoming going through puberty is painful. It hurts, and Carrie shows that very nicely. And it's a little bit panicking, even though you know what's happening. It's still kind of weird. It's a weird change that's going on. It's pretty much the freakiest thing that can happen to you when you think about it. I can totally imagine if you didn't know what it is, that you would absolutely flip out.
I would have lost it.
Yeah, if I didn't know, I would have, yes.
God, and it's also that aspect, like I said, of being uncomfortable with your own body and feeling like you don't fit in anywhere, which in a way it's almost a shame that there's the religious side of the story of Carrie, the mother who's so overbearing and so, because even without those elements, I think we could have understood, because most people at some point in their lives have felt like they didn't fit in and they weren't the popular one and they were kind of the outsider like Carrie is.
I think that's where my problem comes in with relating to it. I always felt that way. I felt like that when I was like in preschool.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So like once I actually got my period, like it didn't make a difference. It was like, oh great, one more.
No, it didn't make a
horrible thing to
difference,
deal
but
with on
it
a daily
just
basis,
it just kind of continues the same experience,
Yeah.
and I think it's worse when you're a teenager. Because when you're a kid, it's still, you can still kind of think, well, yeah, I don't really fit in, but I really like to draw. But no 16-year-old ever said, I know I'm not pretty, but I'm a really good painter.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen at that time.
And at 16, I mean, just one thing can end your proverbial world.
Yeah.
Where just one, you know, like, oh my God, he didn't look at me today. I'm just going to go cry in my bedroom for hours. For some reason, life was just much more dramatic then. And I mean, I think that some of the feelings of being a teenager stick with us all the time. Insecurity, you know, questioning our place in the world or if we're doing the right thing. I think that everybody still, you know, has these moments. But for some reason, when we were 16, it was all the more dramatic.
And another film that I wouldn't say reflects the puberty experience, but certainly has a side to it, is Jennifer's Body. Because it has that girl, there's always the girl who's more sexual, who's more, kind of more advanced in that experience and has that, you know, a step over you and tries to put you down. Because even that girl still has that lack of confidence and feels better being surrounded with people who can make her look better. And it's that kind of idea of having friendships that are not quite equal. And
Yeah, I think that that's a movie that sometimes gets shunned by the horror community, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. I mean,
The dialogue.
It's the dialogue.
The dialogue
Yeah.
witten by Diablo Cody.
Diablo Cody, that's
It
the
was
thing. She
just-
has her own universe, and this is the way she does it, and I totally get it, because that's what I don't like about her films. But yeah, I mean, Jennifer's Body, it's funny because, you know, there's Carrie, and there's Ginger Snaps, and then there's Jennifer's Body, and sort of like progressively, you know, getting more and more sexual and turning away from, you know, here's this demure girl who doesn't even know what a period is. Then we've got this girl who becomes a werewolf because of her period, really. And then we've got Jennifer's Body, and the dynamic between, oh my God, what's the pretty one?
Megan Fox.
Yeah,
Megan Fox.
Well, the other one's
Amanda
super
Seyfried.
pretty too.
Oh yeah, I think Amanda Seyfried is beautiful. But just funny little differences as we progress on, and like, you know, what comes next? What is the next Jennifer's Body? What is the next Ginger Snaps? Is there a recent film that, I mean, I haven't seen one recently.
Yeah, well, this one, I can't say that it's, you know, in the progression. If anything, it kind of steps back. But Jugface was a good one, which was about a kind of cult community in the woods. And one girl who was told, it was one where they have arranged marriages, and she was told that she had to marry this boy, but she didn't want to, and she'd gotten pregnant by somebody else, and so she was really struggling with what to do, but she was very young at the same time. So it was one that definitely was in that same vein of kind of the entrance into womanhood, you know, leaving puberty behind and trying to figure out where you want to head, and she's struggling with whether or not to leave the cult. And the cult's also really creepy, and there's some supernatural elements too.
You know what comes to mind is the movie Teeth.
Oh yeah.
From 2007 with Jen Wexler, where literally this virginal woman all of a sudden gets teeth in her vagina, and every time she tries to have sex, she snaps off the guy's dick. Which, I mean, it's kind of like that's the whole movie, really. But it's kind of the same idea that, like, once you come into your sexuality for some reason, it has to be this horrible horror movie rather than.
But horrible to guys.
Yeah,
More
like, it's
than-
not
I mean,
horrible
the
for the guy.
movie-
He's good,
yeah.
you know, yeah. Yeah, like, and it's horrible for the girl, too. I mean, like, because even though she's having sex, it's like she can't enjoy it. she has no control over her own vagina, and it's scary and weird, and it has these teeth, and it's like this whole other, it's like almost not even her.
It's funny too because recently in American Horror Story Coven, the whole side note of Taissa Farmiga's character, every time she has sex with a guy, he dies.
That's how she kills him.
Yeah, and there's always something wrong with our vaginas. I'm kind of sad about that.
Yeah.
It's like with Henenlotter's Bad Biology. I mean, there's another one right there, and it's just this whole other world based out of a woman's vagina for the most part.
That's Henenlotter.
All those films are made by guys. All those films are directed by guys. I mean,
Is it like
Jennifer's Body was an exception.
Like a fear of promiscuity, I guess. Like it's like women, it's okay to have a vagina, but like don't use it unless the man wants to use it. Then it's okay, but don't you use it because you'll hurt yourself or someone else. Like I'm not really sure what it is. Like what's the message there? But yeah, these characters, these female characters, never seem to be able to actually enjoy the sex, or if they do, it's because they're delighting in the death that they're causing, not the sex itself or their orgasm or anything. They're just, it's like, I don't know. Why can't they just have sex, man? Why can't they just
That might not be a horror film if they just have sex. It's a different type of film.
I guess we need to figure out what comes next. One of you need to make it. What do you think that young guys are learning from these horror movies they see about girls and their puberty experiences?
Well, I hope that we've kind of progressed out of the 80s slasher, because the 80s slasher was the worst, because that was always like you're perfectly fine until you have sex, and now you're just, you're roadkill. So I'm hoping that we've progressed past that to discover that sex is not this horrible sin that's going to get you killed by, someone you wronged 10 years ago or something.
I don't know what I would think if I was a young guy and I saw teeth.
I think it would be shocking, especially if you've never seen lady parts before. It would definitely be kind of a biology lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think these films play on the stereotypes that women are extremely emotional and unhinged, especially when they have their periods or when they're about to get their period or whatever. And it's almost like that times 100. So if I was like a young guy watching these movies, I'd be like, oh yeah, it makes sense because women are just crazy.
It's very conservative when you think about it. Those films are incredibly conservative. You'd like to believe that they kind of push the envelope, and so they must be provocative, and they seem to be very daring. What they're really saying is that women should not have sex outside of marriage, and sexuality is dangerous and difficult if it's women. And again, that brings us back to times when men's adultery was totally fine, but women had to stay at home and be very protected because otherwise they could have children and could have consequences. And we're kind of going back to those days with that kind of.
Another film that I'm a huge fan of Lucky McKee's films. I feel like he's very generous with the parts that he writes for women. I think that he has a different point of view than a lot of male directors have. And the woman, it's this very, very interesting take on a woman who doesn't need any femininity. She doesn't want it. She doesn't need it. And yet she's forced into it. In terms of the woman, I don't know if anybody else has any other films that sort of fit into that mold of a girl being like forced into being a girl. And sort of, it's just a different take on the whole puberty experience in a sense, I guess. But really to sort of like bring things full circle, talking more about Ginger Snaps, what do you think the lasting legacy of Ginger Snaps is? Especially when it comes to, the idea of the female puberty experience in horror films. Is it a detractor? Is it a supporter? What exactly?
I didn't see Ginger Snaps until I was well out of high school and puberty. But for me, even just looking back at it a decade later, it was a film that I was able to say, I totally get this and I understand this. And so I think that it does have a strong legacy just because that's the feelings that the girls have. They don't go away. It doesn't matter if, in 5 years we're at the Jetsons point with flying cars. It doesn't matter where we progress. Those feelings that the girls are experiencing and the confusion and the awkwardness, it's been there forever and it's going to be there forever. So the movie it's going to be here for a while.
Miss Heidi?
As much as I personally don't enjoy the message that the women should be scared of what's happening to them and they're out of control of it, I do think Ginger Snaps is important for a couple reasons. Namely that it's a horror film with 2 lead female characters who talk to each other and they do stuff, and there are boys involved, but they're all secondary characters, and really what's going on is this, it's about the relationship between 2 sisters, it's about these women who are friends, it's about these women who are going through a physical change, and right there, that's a good thing, because I mean, I'm sick of seeing all these movies just about guys and dudes and whatever, and most horror movies are, you know, about guys having, you know, wanting to have sex with girls and then accidentally getting killed while they're doing it. Like, really, that's it. So it's refreshing to see a movie about women and to hear dialogue and women talk about things, and that's pretty cool. So just for that alone, I think that's why it stands out as much as it does, because we do have Carrie, and we do have Teeth, and we do have these other movies that also kind of deal with it, but Ginger Snaps is ultimately a better film in so many ways, and ultimately has better female characters, and
It
we
has
like that.
very complex characters,
Yeah.
and I think that's what's interesting. It shows puberty as something that's kind of terrifying, that's scary for other people, that's scary for themselves, but also kind of empowering in some ways. It does show Ginger become someone that you kind of aspire to be, even though you don't want to turn into a werewolf, you don't want to kill people, but there's something very sexy about her. There's something very, she turns heads. It's kind of what you dream of when you become a teenager. It's to have that attention, and the duality of the power that it gives her, and at the same time the scariness that comes with it is what makes her a really great character, I think.
So I'd just like to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedule to, you know, come in and talk about what us ladies do in horror movies, it seems like. But you know, Ginger Snaps, immortal? Maybe, I don't know. But thanks, Scream Factory.